Most sugar daddies want to feel like their sugar babies are genuinely attracted to them, so even if I'm not emotionally or physically drawn to them, I still have to fake it, smiling, laughing, touching their arm just enough to make them believe it. I haven't had a situation yet where I got too attached, at least not in a romantic way. But my friend Rachel wasn't so lucky. Rachel was everything I wasn't: vibrant, impulsive, with a laugh that could fill a room. She'd always been fiercely independent, a free spirit who bounced from one creative project to another, fueled by caffeine and a restless energy. Meeting Marcus, a man who seemed carved from polished marble and overflowing wealth, seemed completely out of character. But Rachel, bless her impulsive heart, fell hard. He was everything she wasn't used to: expensive suits, a sprawling mansion overlooking the ocean, a life sculpted from privilege. He showered her with gifts: designer handbags, diamond necklaces, weekend trips to exotic locales. He whispered promises, weaving tales of a future where she'd never have to worry about money, where she could dedicate herself entirely to her art. He made her feel safe, cherished, like a priceless jewel in his possession. For a while, it seemed like a fairy tale. But Rachel was different. She allowed herself to feel things, to invest emotionally, where I built walls brick by brick. She fell for the man beneath the veneer of wealth and power, a man who, initially, seemed to reciprocate her feelings. He lavished her with affection, attention that transcended the transactional nature of their arrangement. Or so she thought. Then came the night of too much wine and spilled secrets. The night she confessed her feelings, the night she confessed she wanted more than just the glittering lifestyle, the endless stream of gifts. She wanted him, truly wanted him, to ditch the arrangement and be together. I remember her recounting it, her voice trembling, her eyes filled with a naive hope that had already been cruelly extinguished. He didn't yell, didn't storm off in a rage. He simply smiled, a chillingly calm and controlled smile, kissed her forehead, and left. The fairy tale ended not with a bang, but with a silent, suffocating close. The aftermath began subtly, escalating into a terrifying crescendo. The break-in wasn't about theft. It was a violation, a brutal display of power. Her underwear drawer, slashed and scattered, her mirrors shattered, a deliberate act of humiliation and destruction. The police, unhelpful as always, shrugged it off as a random act of vandalism despite her fervent belief that Marcus was behind it. Then came the texts. Blank messages in the dead of night, a silent, chilling presence in the digital ether. Then the pictures started, escalating in their invasion of her privacy. Photos of her walking to work, sitting in her favorite coffee shop, even sleeping in her own bed, clear evidence of someone watching her, stalking her every move. Blocking the number proved useless. The photos started appearing taped to her door, cold, silent reminders of his omnipresent gaze. She moved, changed her number, even got a drastic haircut, but the harassment followed, relentless and terrifying. The box outside her new apartment, containing her blood-stained dress, was the final, chilling blow. The blood, she swore, wasn't hers. The last time I saw Rachel, she was a shell. Her vibrant spirit dimmed, replaced by a haunted, hollow-eyed fear. She was jumpy, constantly looking over her shoulder, convinced Marcus had people watching her, following her everywhere. She was breaking under the pressure, a once bright star fading into nothingness. She said she couldn't take it anymore. 2 days later, she disappeared. Her apartment was empty, her phone disconnected. The police, unsurprisingly, labeled it a runaway case, a woman choosing to disappear. They said she likely ran off to start afresh. But I didn't believe it. How could I, when I kept receiving blank texts at 2 a.m., the same time she'd receive hers? How could I, when I swear I saw her dress, that blood-stained dress, hanging in the back seat of a car that looked a hell of a lot like Marcus's? The similarities between my experiences and Rachel's are chilling. I, too, engage in a transactional relationship, but I've always maintained emotional distance, a protective barrier built from years of observing the underbelly of this world. Rachel's vulnerability was her downfall, a lesson I learned too late. Her story became a cautionary tale, a constant reminder of the dark side of a world I inhabit. Sometimes, at night, I wake up to the same 2 a.m. blank texts. Sometimes I think I see his car, a sleek, dark vehicle that blends into the shadows, tailing me. I've changed my apartment, my number, my routine, yet the anxiety gnaws under my skin, the fear is a constant companion. I know the police will dismiss any concern, and so I live with the quiet terror, the ever-present feeling of being watched. I live with the knowledge that what happened to Rachel could happen to me. The fear is not just for myself, but for every other woman in a similar arrangement. It's a silent scream, a desperate plea for understanding in a world where wealth and power can be used as weapons, where the transactional nature of these relationships can become twisted into something far more sinister. It's a constant reminder that the gilded cage of luxury can hide a very dark, very dangerous heart. Rachel's disappearance haunts me, not only as the loss of a friend, but as a chilling premonition of what could happen if I ever let my guard down, a testament to the dangers inherent when lines blur between transactional relationships and genuine emotion. And every unanswered blank text, every fleeting glimpse of a familiar car, is a constant reminder that the shadow of Marcus, and perhaps others like him, still looms. The silence is deafening, a chilling testament to a story that may never have a true resolution, a story that continues to unfold in the blank texts of the dead of night. I started on exclusive sugar baby or sugar daddy websites like Secret Benefits and Sudi, desperate for the financial stability I thought I could find. The glossy profiles, the promises of lavish lifestyles, the whispered allure of a world where money exchanged hands freely for companionship, it was seductive. My student loan debt loomed like a guillotine, and the meager part-time job I held barely covered rent. The idea of a wealthy benefactor, someone who could alleviate my financial anxieties with a flick of the wrist, felt like a lifeline. The reality, however, was less glamorous. The men on those sites, while often generous with their words, were often stingy with their actual money. I encountered countless ghosters, men who'd shower me with flowery compliments and promises, only to vanish without a trace once they'd extracted a few suggestive photos. Others were outright rude, condescending, their interactions reducing me to a transactional object, stripped of any semblance of human dignity. The carefully curated images on their profiles often belied a reality of cheap motels and awkward silences punctuated by uncomfortable advances. After months of fruitless chasing, a bitter taste of disillusionment settled in. The financial stability I craved remained elusive, replaced instead by a growing sense of desperation and self-loathing. I'd sunk too deep into this world to easily back out. The need for money had become a crippling addiction. With a sinking feeling, I expanded my search, abandoning the exclusive platforms and venturing onto the more mainstream dating apps, Tinder, Plenty of Fish, places where the pursuit of money was less blatant, more cloaked in the guise of ordinary romance. My strategy shifted, targeting older men. They seemed more desperate, more willing to pay for companionship and less likely to be burdened with the unrealistic expectations and transactional nature of the sugar daddy sites. My profile, carefully crafted, spoke of independence and ambition. I made it explicitly clear up front that I was pragmatic about money and that I expected financial compensation for my time. It was a calculated risk, a way to filter out those who wouldn't accept my terms. Surprisingly, it worked. I started getting matches. The conversations were initially casual, but they quickly steered towards financial arrangements. The first man, Richard, seemed harmless enough. He introduced himself as a retired businessman, his profile picture showing him on a yacht, a tanned and smiling face against a backdrop of azure waters. He communicated through carefully worded texts, promising a life of luxury in exchange for a few dates. He spoke of fine dining, theater tickets, weekend getaways. The allure was strong. The first few dates were, admittedly, extravagant. Richard showered me with gifts, expensive jewelry, designer clothes, enough cash to significantly ease my financial anxieties. But there was something off about him, a subtle undercurrent of unease that I initially dismissed as nervousness. The dates became increasingly private, taking place in secluded locations. His apartment, isolated restaurants with hushed corners and dim lighting. The gifts, once generous, now felt like a form of entrapment. Each piece of jewelry became a weighted chain, tightening its hold with every passing encounter. The conversations, initially light and superficial, grew increasingly personal, probing and invasive. He asked about my family, my finances, my vulnerabilities. He'd drop hints about his connections, his power, his ability to make things disappear. It was a subtle form of intimidation, slowly eroding my confidence and making me question my own judgment. The more I accepted his gifts, the more entangled I felt, the more difficult it became to disentangle myself from his web. When I tried to distance myself, to politely decline further meetings, the tone of his messages shifted drastically. The jovial businessman was replaced by a colder, angrier persona. The texts became increasingly threatening, veiled in cryptic warnings about consequences. My initial fear turned to cold dread. It was then that I stumbled upon a hidden folder on his phone, a collection of photographs. Women, all young and strikingly similar to me, their faces blurred, their bodies clearly identifiable. Each image was captioned with a date, a location, a fleeting description. It was a chilling record of his conquests, a grim roll call of names that I instinctively knew were likely lost souls. My heart pounded in my chest. I was not the only one. I ran. I cut all contact, changed my phone number, moved apartments. The fear, however, lingered like a phantom limb. I spent weeks scrutinizing my surroundings, convinced that he could appear at any moment. I was haunted by the faces in the photographs, their unspoken stories, their silent screams resonating in the silence of my apartment. The experience shattered me. It forced me to confront the darker side of the world I'd entered, a world where the veneer of wealth and luxury concealed a horrifying underbelly of manipulation, control, and potential violence. The line between what I wanted and what I feared had become completely blurred. They weren't just paying for company, they were paying for control, for the opportunity to wield power over vulnerable young women. The men I encountered weren't just individuals, they were predators, their actions meticulously planned, their intentions insidious and malevolent. The subsequent months were a blur of therapy sessions, sleepless nights, and a constant gnawing fear. I learned that my experience was not unique. I found support groups, online forums, where women shared similar stories, their voices echoing mine, whispers of manipulation, exploitation, and near misses with unimaginable horrors. The financial desperation that drove me into that world still lingers, a constant reminder of my vulnerability. But I also carry with me a profound understanding of the dangers lurking beneath the surface of online dating, a world where the allure of wealth can mask the most sinister of intentions. I'm not a victim, not anymore. I escaped. But the experience left its mark, leaving me to wonder how many other women remain trapped in similar circumstances, their stories lost, their voices unheard. I now use my experience to warn others, to share my story, and to advocate for greater safety and awareness within the online dating world. The scars remain, but they are a reminder of my survival, a testament to my strength, and a catalyst for my ongoing fight against the predators who prey on the vulnerable. The fight is far from over, but I am alive to continue it. I was drowning. Working 4 jobs, trying to keep up with everything, and the pressure of my master's program was suffocating. My brain felt like it was constantly on fire, and the thought of failure gnawed at me. My husband, Mark, and I had talked about it one night, late, after I had buried myself in a heap of bills and coursework. The kitchen table was littered with papers, invoices, syllabuses, bank statements, a testament to our increasingly desperate situation. He wasn't entirely comfortable, but he understood. He saw the exhaustion etched onto my face, the way my shoulders slumped under the weight of it all. He knew I needed a way out, and quickly. The conversation had been hushed, punctuated by the clinking of mugs and the sigh of exhaustion that seemed to hang perpetually in the air. I had confessed my fear, the fear of not graduating, of losing our small apartment, of failing him. He'd held my hand, his touch a grounding force in the chaos. But even his unwavering support couldn't alleviate the crushing weight of my responsibilities. It started innocently enough, a Google search born out of desperation. I typed in financial assistance for graduate students, expecting to find scholarships or grants. Instead, an article on sugar babies popped up, and a sickening part of me, a part buried deep under layers of stress and exhaustion, saw it as a lifeline. The idea was repulsive, a violation of everything I believed in. But the alternative, complete and utter financial ruin, the crushing weight of failure, was even more terrifying. I told myself it was a temporary fix, a bridge to get me across this impossible chasm. A means to an end. A lie I desperately needed to believe. I signed up for seeking arrangements, using a fake name, Sarah, hiding behind a profile that highlighted my quirks, my love for old movies, my passion for history, my crippling addiction to dark chocolate, all carefully curated to present a palatable, almost innocent facade. The fake smiles were the hardest part. They felt foreign, unnatural, a mask I wore to hide the turmoil raging within. The messages flooded in, fast and furious. Their tone was a sickening blend of desperation and entitlement. The term, daddy, I couldn't stomach it. It felt wrong, infantilizing, degrading, reducing me to something less than human. But it was the price I was willing to pay. They wanted someone to possess, to control. I told myself it was just business. Just a way to get through. The initial meetings were surreal. Expensive dinners in dimly lit restaurants, lavish displays of wealth designed to impress. I played the part, the grateful student, the charming companion. I was an actress on a stage, delivering lines I didn't believe, performing a role that felt increasingly alien. The temporary escape these dinners provided was a cruel illusion, a fleeting moment of respite before the inevitable descent into the darkness. The reality was far from the transactional exchange I'd envisioned. It was a nightmare. I had to walk a tightrope between manipulation and compliance, constantly shifting, always on edge. They didn't care about me. They wanted something darker, something beneath the surface, something they believed they could possess. I had to make them believe I was something I wasn't, confident, playful, submissive. The constant performance took its toll, leaving me emotionally drained and hollow. The nights were the worst. The expensive hotels, the private suites, the suffocating feeling of being trapped. The sex wasn't about pleasure. It was an exchange of power, a grotesque display of control. They'd look at me like a thing, a piece of meat to be consumed, while I felt the weight of my own self-hatred swell inside. My body was there, but my mind was screaming, begging for release, for a way out. I couldn't leave. I needed the money. I needed to survive. The tuition payments came through, offering a temporary reprieve, a momentary sense of relief. But it was never enough. It could never undo the damage. I felt my own identity unraveling, like a threadbare tapestry slowly coming apart at the seams. I wasn't me anymore. I was a vessel. A thing for them to use, to dispose of. The numbness spread, a chilling blanket that suffocated my emotions. I could see myself in the mirror, but it was like looking at a stranger. The eyes were dull, the smile forced, the vibrant spark that once defined me completely extinguished. And then there were the men who crossed every boundary, pushing me further than I ever intended to go. The violation extended beyond the physical. It was an assault on my soul. I'd scream inside, but no one would hear me. They didn't care. They took what they wanted, and I was left trying to patch the pieces of myself back together, pretending it didn't hurt. The emotional damage was far worse than the physical. I couldn't sleep without hearing their whispers, feeling their hands, even though they were gone. It wasn't just in the moment, it followed me, haunted me. Every time I tried to break free, I would find myself back in that room, in that same cycle. Every encounter felt like it was chipping away at something deeper inside of me, leaving me hollower and more vulnerable with each passing encounter. It wasn't the money, it was the constant fear of judgment, of being exposed, of being seen as something less than worthy. The fear clung to me like a second skin, suffocating me, preventing me from asking for help from anyone, even Mark. In the end, I paid the price. Yes, I got my tuition paid, but at what cost? I graduated, but the victory felt hollow, tainted by the bitter taste of self-disgust. I had achieved my academic goal, but at the expense of my self-respect, my dignity, my very soul. I am a walking contradiction, a successful graduate student haunted by the ghosts of my past. I don't recommend it. Sugaring isn't just a transaction, it's a soul-stealing, suffocating nightmare. It's not easy, not glamorous, and it's not just about money. It's about losing everything that makes you human. You lose yourself, piece by piece, until you're nothing but an empty shell, cold, vacant, and haunted by your own choices. Stay clear, or become something else entirely. Something you'll never recognize in the mirror. Something you'll never want to be. My story is a warning, a stark reminder that sometimes, the path to survival can lead to utter destruction. And the scars, both visible and invisible, may never fully heal. I thought I had control. At first, it was all so glamorous. The allure of the sugar daddy life, the promises of lavish gifts, expensive dinners, and the facade of power and security. My Instagram feed, once filled with carefully curated shots of my struggling artist life, transformed into a dazzling display of champagne wishes and caviar dreams. It wasn't just the money, though that was a significant lure. I was 22, adrift in a city that felt both exhilarating and utterly indifferent to my existence. Rent was overdue, my gallery submissions were consistently rejected, and the weight of mounting debt felt like a physical burden. The sugar daddy lifestyle, whispered about in hushed tones by friends, offered a seductive escape. The first few encounters were exhilarating. Richard, my first sugar daddy, was everything I imagined and more. He was handsome, successful, and charming, with a disarming smile and a laugh that sent shivers down my spine. He showered me with gifts, designer handbags, diamond earrings, weekend getaways to exotic locations. Dinners were at Michelin-starred restaurants, the conversation effortless and engaging. He made me feel valued, important, like a princess in a fairy tale. I told myself I was in control, that I was simply exchanging companionship for financial security. It was a transaction, nothing more. But the illusion began to crack with his full allowance for the month. It wasn't just the amount, though it was a sum I could only dream of earning through my art. It was the way he looked at me after I accepted it, a possessiveness that felt suffocating, a shift in the dynamic that I hadn't anticipated. The casual intimacy transformed into something more demanding, more consuming. He wanted more than just my time, he wanted me. He started subtly eroding my boundaries. He insisted on choosing my outfits, dictating my schedule, criticizing my friends, my aspirations, my very essence. His touch, initially gentle and respectful, became increasingly controlling, his kisses demanding, his words laced with possessiveness. "What we have is real," he'd whisper, his breath hot against my ear, his hand gripping my arm with unnerving force. The transaction was complete, the money exchanged, but the exchange was far from over. He wanted my soul, and he was systematically dismantling me to take it. The next month, the allowance was halved. My initial anger quickly dissolved into a chilling realization. I confronted him, expecting an explanation, but his response sent a shiver down my spine. A twisted smile played on his lips as his fingers grazed my cheek, cold despite the warmth of the room. "You know what I really need now, don't you?" he purred, his eyes glinting with a predatory gleam. The subtle coercion had become blatant. The boundaries had dissolved, and I was expected to give more, to offer more of myself than I'd ever intended. Every touch, every word was a deliberate attempt to manipulate, to break my spirit. The charming facade had fallen away, revealing the cold, calculating predator beneath. He wasn't alone. Other men followed, each with their own polished masks and carefully constructed personas. They weren't interested in genuine connection. They wanted control, dominion over my thoughts and actions. They weren't paying for companionship, they were buying a puppet, and I was slowly becoming its lifeless strings. One particularly disturbing encounter involved a man who insisted I abandon protection, a grotesque perversion of trust that felt like a violent violation. It wasn't about pleasure, it was about power, about obliterating my autonomy. It was the ultimate form of control, forcing me into a situation where my physical and emotional safety became completely dependent on his whim. The constant barrage of manipulation left me emotionally drained, my sense of self fractured and fragmented. The bright lights and lavish gifts were fading into a blurry background, replaced by a gnawing emptiness. I was a ghost of my former self, drifting through a world of opulent parties and expensive hotels, a hollow shell existing solely to fulfill the desires of men who saw me as an object, a commodity. The darker the nights grew, the more acutely I understood that this wasn't a fair trade. There was no sweetness in this sugar. It was poison, slowly killing me from the inside out. The turning point came when, in a moment of clarity, I realized I was trapped. This wasn't a life, it was a slow, agonizing death of my spirit. I knew I needed to escape, but the fear of financial ruin was a powerful inhibitor. Yet, the longing for self-respect, for the reclamation of my own agency, was even stronger. I decided to take back control, but not by returning to my impoverished existence. I chose to redefine my terms, to take the power back on my own accord. I transitioned to escorting, but on my own terms. I chose my clients, setting clear boundaries and ensuring my safety. The men I met were different. They were businesslike, respectful, and generous. There were no pretensions of romance or affection, no masks of false charm. They wanted a service, and I provided it efficiently and professionally. It was raw, unsentimental, and sometimes brutal, but it wasn't degrading. The money flowed easily, but more importantly, I felt a sense of control I hadn't experienced since before I entered the sugar daddy world. I was no longer an object of desire, I was in charge of my own narrative. I was a professional, a businesswoman, in control of my earnings and my safety. The scars remained, though. The memory of those men, of their manipulative smiles and controlling touches, still lingers, a dark stain on my past. The emotional wounds are deep, a constant reminder of how easily one can lose themselves in the intoxicating allure of power and money. The emptiness, the hollow feeling, still occasionally surfaces, a ghostly echo of the self I almost lost. The betrayal of my own trust in myself is a burden I carry, a lesson etched into the deepest parts of my being. It's a reminder that some wounds, no matter how meticulously you tend them, leave an indelible mark. The world of sugar daddies is a double-edged sword, glittering with promises of luxury and independence, yet simultaneously sharp enough to cut you down to your core. It's a landscape littered with shattered dreams and broken spirits, a testament to the seductive power of manipulation and control. It's a world where every touch can mean the end of your autonomy, where the price of fleeting glamour is often your very soul. If you're not careful, you'll wake up one day, and you'll be nothing more than an empty shell, just another player in someone else's game. But I escaped. I found my own power, my own voice. And that, more than anything, is what truly matters. The scars remain, a constant reminder to guard my boundaries, to never again surrender my self-worth for the illusion of security. The champagne flowed freely, the laughter felt effortless, and the expensive dinners felt like a delicious escape from the mundane reality of my cramped apartment and the ever-present weight of student loans. It was a world of effortless glamour, a stark contrast to the chipped paint and leaky faucet of my everyday life. Richard was the first. He was everything the carefully curated profiles promised: charming, successful, older, and undeniably handsome. He had a way of making you feel like the only person in the room, his attention a warm blanket on a cold night. He spoke of his yacht, his penthouse apartment overlooking the city, his connections, his influence. He made promises of a life beyond my wildest dreams, a world where financial worries were a distant memory. He painted a picture of ease, of freedom, and I, naive and desperate for a respite from the relentless pressure of making ends meet, readily accepted the brushstrokes. The initial weeks were a whirlwind. Richard showered me with gifts, designer handbags, diamond earrings, lavish vacations. He whisked me away to 5-star hotels, where we dined on caviar and champagne, and the only concern was choosing which silk pajamas to wear to bed. He seemed genuinely interested in me, asking about my aspirations, my dreams, my fears. He listened intently, offering advice and encouragement, and for a while, I believed his affection was real. I allowed myself to be swept away by the illusion of a fairy tale romance. But the cracks began to show. The sweet texts morphed into demands. The playful touches became possessive clutches. The casual dates transformed into carefully orchestrated events where I was expected to perform a specific role: the adoring girlfriend, the attentive listener, the perpetually grateful recipient of his generosity. He started making comments, veiled at first, then increasingly overt, about my body, my clothes, my behavior. He'd say things like, "You're looking good, but you could be better," or, "Your dress is nice, but it doesn't show off your figure enough." The compliments were laced with a subtle undercurrent of criticism, a constant reminder that I was being evaluated, assessed, and ultimately controlled. The constant barrage of texts became suffocating. He'd demand updates on my location, question who I was with, and scrutinize my every move. "You're not mine yet," he'd say, his voice a low growl, even through the phone. "I've given you everything. You owe me your time, your attention, your loyalty." The money was good, exceptionally good, but it couldn't fill the growing emptiness inside me. The opulent surroundings couldn't mask the chilling realization that Richard didn't love me, he possessed me. He saw me not as a person, but as an acquisition, a trophy to be displayed and controlled. The turning point came during a lavish weekend getaway. He'd been drinking heavily, and his usual charm had dissipated, replaced by a simmering anger. He crossed the line that day, one that snapped something within me, pushing me from passive participant to active player. I realized I wasn't just being bought, I was being broken. And that ignited a fire in me. I started playing the game differently. I learned his patterns, his triggers, his vulnerabilities. I learned to manipulate his desires, to twist his expectations to my advantage. I would shower him with affection when it suited me, then withdraw it completely, leaving him craving my attention. I'd appear vulnerable, eliciting his protectiveness, only to push him away, playing on his need to control. The second man, Daniel, was different. He wasn't charming. He was cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of sentiment. He didn't woo me with gifts or romantic gestures. He offered power, influence, access. He was ruthless, and he saw me not as a girlfriend, but as a tool, a means to an end. He saw my vulnerabilities, my insecurities, and he used them against me. He chipped away at my confidence, systematically dismantling my self-worth. His critiques were brutal, his mockery cutting. He'd belittle my aspirations, dismiss my opinions, and undermine my sense of self. He reveled in my discomfort, finding pleasure in my pain. But I discovered a strange, dark satisfaction in his attempts to break me. It fueled me, and ironically it gave me power. The breaking point with Daniel was his demand that I stop using protection, his words chillingly devoid of any regard for my well-being. It wasn't about affection, desire, or romance. It was pure, unadulterated control. And this time, I wasn't going to let him have it. I pushed back. I retaliated. I played his game, but on my terms. I started to withhold things he craved, my affection, my attention, even my body, twisting his desires into a cruel game of his own. I saw the fury boiling beneath his cold exterior, the frustration mounting with each denial. He was used to getting what he wanted, when he wanted it, and suddenly he was powerless. This was intoxicating. His need to control me became my weapon, his possessiveness my power. The game evolved. The men who came after, seeking the same kind of control, the same kind of subservience, underestimated me. They thought they were the predators, but I had become something else entirely. I became a master manipulator, a puppeteer pulling their strings. The money became irrelevant. The extravagant gifts were mere props in my elaborate performance. My goal wasn't luxury, it was control. I wanted them to feel the same powerlessness I had once felt. I relished their desperation, their pleas, their pathetic attempts to regain control. They sought a sugar baby, but they found a predator. I could see their desperation in their eyes, the way they hung on my every word, their bodies trembling with the need for approval, for affection, for anything to fill the emptiness I created. They were addicted to the chase, to the power dynamic, to being completely, utterly dependent on me. And I had them all exactly where I wanted them. I allowed them to believe they owned me, to believe they held power over me. But in reality, they were merely playing a role in a meticulously crafted performance, a game in which I held all the cards. I'd let them go, one by one, leaving them with the raw, bitter taste of their own failure, their own inability to control me. The emptiness they felt wasn't a consequence of my lack of affection, it was a consequence of their own defeat. By the end, I realized I had become something far removed from that naive girl who initially sought a simple escape. I was a siren, a temptress, a puppet master who had mastered the art of manipulation and control. And in that twisted power, I found a terrifying sort of satisfaction. The luxury, the money, the gifts, they were all secondary effects. What truly mattered was the power. I had become the game, and I was winning, utterly and completely. The question now was, would I ever want to stop?